Perfect. We are live. Hi everyone. I'm Neha. I'm here with Ram today, the co-founder of Kocharya, and today we're going to be talking about um, uh, the changing workplace and how we can navigate how the workplace is changing over this period of the pandemic and how it's going to be changed forever. Um, Ram, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, the situation these days. What are you hearing? You've got your finger on the pulse as to what's going on in the world. What are you hearing? What are you sensing?
Okay, let me provide a preamble to this because we have been attempting to build a strong corporate base as part of our leadership programs, both in coaching, coach training, and allied fields probably for almost about 5 or 6 years now. And I'll elaborate it on later what I would call as a systemic team leadership approach. And we had a lot of difficulties in convincing companies to look at it, simply because they were most companies had been brainwashed into thinking that coaching is about the individuals. And much as I would talk to them about saying that, look, it's just not about individuals, because even if you manage to transform, and if you can, certainly, um, that effect stays with the individual. It doesn't really transfer into the organization, which is investing huge amounts of money in these kind of programs. And to work with a group of people as a team is a natural consequence of the way that companies work, because leaders are supposed to work in teams and not just be selfish stars for their own fulfillment of ambitions. But all this really didn't cut much ice. In fact, quite often, uh, the L&D and HR people would say, hey, why don't you talk to the group of people to whom we would like you to provide coaching? And so I would meet about with 3 or 4 CXOs. And when I would ask them, how would you like it to be? Why don't you? It'll be much cheaper for the organization, much more effective for you if we were to work as a team. And I say, no, 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 we would like to do. So my question very often, and it pretty much quite a few times ended up in a block, was that if you guys are really working as a team of leaders, and that's what you are supposed to for the maximum benefit of the organization, and here you are even unwilling to be coached as a team, so what gives? What's happening out here? And of course, it wasn't a very pleasant thing for egoistic leaders to hear, and many of them at that level are extremely egoistic. So this is what was happening, but something suddenly seems to have changed in the last 3 years, since 2020, and people are willing to listen, and there's a lot of pressure on them in multiple ways. Simple thing is that the phenomenon that you see of young people is saying, to hell with you. I'm resigning my job. I would like to work from home. Who the hell are you to tell me how to work and what to do, etc. So the the shoes on the other foot now. So it's no longer these guys who are sitting in their thrones of comfort and trying to hold on to their job in whatever way they can at senior leadership levels, trying to direct people what to do. And it was already happening to a large extent with the millennials and the Gen Z and so on and so forth. But I think the pandemic, to a large extent, has really, really put the lid on it in many ways. And people do realize now more than ever that there is nothing certain. You can't take a stupid manual or a guidebook for an organization and say, hey, this is how it's going to be prescribed, which was okay for bureaucrats. Even bureaucrats are changing their tone and tune now. And corporate leaders who believed in that kind of bureaucracy and guided leadership today have no place to be in. And so I think there's a huge inner turmoil that is happening within many organizations. Many of them call it by different ways. Some of them call it as a transformation. Some of them are calling it a cultural change. And others are just saying, now we want to build a high performance culture which is capable of coping with VUCA. So My answer to that is what VUCA? Every day is a VUCA now. So you don't even know what the heck is going to happen to you the next day. And that is much more clear than any time else. And on top of it, there are things with the climate you just don't know. In a place like Bangalore, where I am, uh, it's as evident as it is in probably the east coast of United States and everywhere else. And you have no control, absolutely no control over what's happening around you. And that is a bitter truth and a revelation that is happening to people around. So, in a situation where you have no control, where you have no compass, and you need to still survive and grow and sustain, the only way to do that is to give up that belief I know everything and to understand I don't know a damn thing, and then seek multiple lenses of views so that we are able to move to a collaborative, deliberately intended solution towards what we can possibly do. It will still never be a solution. It only be a way forward, and which we keep adjusting as we go along. And it's a self-learning R2D2, if you will, that kind of a stuff which will happen. So this is what I'm seeing in a simple way around me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you've just said. I think when you also talk about multiple lenses, looking at things from multiple lenses, I think perhaps one of the most important things that people tend to neglect in these organizations is looking at it from the lens of the people working within the organization, within the actual team itself, rather than having an outside perspective. I mean, which is also can be important, of course, but it seems a lot of managers tend to neglect that. So, which brings us to the systemic nature of of coaching that you talk about. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How does
Yeah,
that?
let me start with what you said, which is very correct. Earlier, if you really talked about the client centric, really meant only the external client and so on and so forth, or powerful stakeholders of our investors and things like that. But much as people talked about people as being resources, they too treated them as tools of their convenience. And now things are changing. The worms turned, and it's not going to be the same ever. So when we talk about systemic, it's two things. One is there's a great amount of internal focus, no doubt about it, because you need to know what's really happening with the individuals who constitute teams and then people who are above. And then the system is ever growing kind of structure. It's you can sort of visualize it as circles within circles within circles. At the core of it is the individual, and around it are the groups and the teams that work towards. And simple differentiation between groups and teams is, I would just leave it at, a team has a very clear focus as together what they need to do. The group may not need to be. The team has to be there for emotionally bonded, etc. Those kind of things need to be there. And beyond that is, let's say, the larger organization. Sometimes it could be in a very large organization. It could be a business unit. Then could be the larger organization. Then there could be an industry atmosphere over that, and there could be a country, there could be a region, and so on and so forth. And you can keep on going forever into a larger and larger ecosystem in that kind of a sense. So the individual is still very much the key, and that is where the central thing of that you said about the people who work in the organization, who works for you or who you report to, and they are extremely important. But at the same time, as part of the larger ecosystem is also the customers. The larger ecosystem are the vendors. The larger ecosystem are even people who you do not think may be potentially your customers. They could be the burgeoning, what is often called the blue ocean strategy customers, and so on and so forth. And recently, in a discussion with top 20 leaders or so in the country, which I was working with, one of them said, "Look, we run warehouses, and suddenly we have this issue where people living around that neighborhood are coming and saying, so you can't operate here because your drivers are coming all over the place, all over the time. And in the COVID time, it's not possible." And we never even considered that possibility. So they are new set of stakeholders who become extremely important because they can cause us a lot of trouble. It's physically that environment where we are in, that kind of a stuff. So Those are the kind of things which could make a difference. So at one level, it is about where one of my good friends, mentors, and one of the gurus of systemic coaching always says, it's a outward in and future back, in the sense that you are really looking at space in terms of both inside and outside, anything in between, and the time from future to the past in between the present. So you take into consideration all this in terms of how these are going to affect you. And therefore, you need to really collect a lot of information. It's not simple. So it follows design thinking to some extent. It follows data analytics and so on in terms of how you collect data and you process it. You really suss out data from various people by whatever means, by individual calls, by surveys, or whatever you do. You need to have a lot of data to assess what the climate of the organization is, what the culture of the organization is, what it is now, what do people wish it to be, and how are they comparing it with somebody else. And within these parameters, then we can really talk to the individual company leaders to find out what their thoughts are in terms of what they want to do, what are they doing now, so what is the gap between these two, and then finally arrive at a kind of a general solution which we can both agree with and we work towards, and continuously in collaboration with those leaders, and generally, most often, working with a specified team, which we then help to bond into a specified group of people who we then try and help to form into a very focused team, emotionally bonded team. So in a very simple way, a systemic approach looks at number of people coming together as a team with a clear set of goals, a focused set of goals, who are really working towards a larger interest of stakeholders who are, as I said earlier, inside, outside, and future back. And one of the most important elements is how do they emotionally connect with each other? So automatically, one of the things that companies desire today as people engagement gets addressed in this fashion. The trouble is, it's a lot more complex than just working with an individual and saying, hey, done and dusted. I've done 6 programs or 9 programs. After that, what the hell happens to that guy? Who the hell knows? Because coaches have a way of saying, oh, no, 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 we are not responsible for the results. I'm sorry, buddy. Things are changing. Companies are clear, very, very clear, that you damn well commit to what you're promising, and it needs to happen. And I think the only way to make that happen is through a systemic approach, and by aligning the individual to the organization through the team, because it's impossible to align the individual directly with the organization. It has to be done in multiple steps in very large organizations. So that is a process that we adopt.
Why can't it be a direct link? Why are those steps needed?
See, the kind of stuff which relates an individual directly or much larger organization is like things like patriotism and all that rubbish. Okay. It just doesn't work. Okay. I mean, if all of us can be sort of be very spiritual and say, Vasudeva Kudambaha, we believe in the universe to be one family, and because of this, I desire this, and so on and so forth. It doesn't happen. We are all fragmented. Okay. So take a simple example of, let's say, okay, if India plays Pakistan in a test match, and if a, a Muslim guy praises Pakistan, the guy is lynched. I mean, it's pathetic. And but leaving aside that, then you come down here, and if there is a, let's say, a team from Chennai playing a team from Delhi, immediately there's a northwest divide. And if you go regionally, if a team from Karnataka plays against Chennai, there would be still a divide. So at every point in time, in reality, we are fragmented, and you can keep dividing it. And then you will find that within that, there are communities and there are castes or whatever. We have designed such a wonderful system, especially in our country with our caste and everything. Even this is what I feel very sad about today. I was reading amongst the Sikhs, they are saying this person is a Jat, that person is a Dalit. My God, I mean, Guru Nanak and others formed a religion which was without class and without caste. And today they are trying to pick leaders who are based on caste and that. So it is impossible to get someone to connect directly with a much larger goal of an organization or a larger systemic goal. And it has to be done with, yes, you, because your surroundings influence you. So you need to have a team of people who work with, who have got common ideals and common goals and common culture. And that then becomes a larger one, maybe the business division or whatever, and then the organization. So it necessarily is in practical terms. And this is not often addressed in, because I wrote a book on culture, boundaries of culture and so on. And I studied this quite a bit. And then I found this was a very, very important factor, that the culture of an organization, just because somebody develops it at the top level of a company which has got 300,000 people, like, for example, a company like TCS in India, for instance, just doesn't mean that because the CEO said that and the guy down below, maybe clerical staff or whatever, he automatically understands that. For him, what the reality is, what his immediate team says, or what his immediate boss says, or boss's boss says. So does it flow through? So that's the only way that it'll operate, and it'll operate forever. Otherwise, you can have an army with a general directly giving instruction to a private. Why doesn't it happen? Why the hell do you have to have a hierarchy of going from general into brigades, into whatever else, into troops, and so on and so forth, all that kind of a stuff that needs to happen? It's a simple reality of life. But that's a very important question that you asked.
And in the workforce, this feels like it's much more important than ever, because even as teams, there's a certain kind of entanglement and engagement that happens when you're going into a physical workspace. Whereas now we're all remote, even our teams, even I've never met my team members ever. And so it's more important than ever, perhaps, to have that kind of engagement with one another, to have that enmeshment with one another, to get certain human needs fulfilled within the context of a workspace.
Absolutely, totally. And it's become even more important today, because it's so much more difficult, because you don't see each other in reality, and it's virtual, and therefore there has to be that much stronger emotional bond that is generated. So what are those commonalities which will generate that bond? So it is not only just between one person and, let's say, assuming that they were a much larger company, between any one of the people who are working in the company and the CEO of the company or me. It just can't be left to chance like that. It has to be with each person meshing together as a team, and then that team meshing with another team and so on. So it has to work in a cellular way, that it has to come together. So it's extremely important, and it's a challenge. It's not easy, but point is there are many companies which are realizing it today, and they are taking it extremely seriously. Just yesterday we were talking to a company where they have put down as, and this was actually surveyed with their workforce and fairly senior level leaders, and they said of course, they had about a dozen principles, directive principles or leadership principles, and one of them was that we would like to have a kind of a coaching culture which is developed amongst us. Another company clearly came up with empathy at the workspace for people to engage with each other to happen, which is pretty much a consequence of a good quality, let's say, coaching-led culture and so on. So many companies are coming to this realization on their own, and they are seeing what's happening in the ground space today. And in order for them to get that buy-in from the people that they are working with and keep the morale up and get them together, these are needed.
That's great. It feels important. It feels like world-changing stuff, life-changing stuff, cultural changing stuff, humanity-changing stuff.
If you want to survive and grow, you need to be systemic in that sense of what I'm saying. Just the same way I would say you need to be spiritual. You need to take care of other people, not just yourself. It's not going to work. So I think for me, the systemic approach and the spiritual approach go very, very close together.
Great. So I would love to hear a little bit about this program that you conduct every year. So every year, once a year, there's a program that you conduct for managers and leaders in organizations to then take away and implement into their own organization. I would love to hear just a little bit about that course from you.
Yeah, sure. I've been doing it for now 3 years, or perhaps a little bit more, and this is only once a year because in between I completely stopped getting into training part. We had enough trainers to be able to do that, but I did want to get back into it, and for a cause in terms of I felt genuinely that the corporate space is one which offers tremendous value in terms of changing the value of, in a sense, the general culture of people. They have tremendous influence in being able to do it in multiple ways. So they can make or even break. And so they need to understand what makes and what breaks, as it were. So wanted to start this with a systemic approach because I found that working by myself in the systemic space, it made such a huge difference. Literally miracles happen when we did systemic work with teams of leaders rather than individuals. The companies came back and said, "Hey, what the hell have you done? It's like a miracle." I said, "It's no miracle. It's just happening. You guys did it. Your people did it, and this is a way it can happen." And then more and more sort of evidence was coming from different parts of the world. So we started this about 3 years ago. At that time, of course, we were not sufficiently visible in the corporate space to attract that many people, despite the fact I had a very strong corporate leadership background. But over the last 2 years, gradually, we've been getting more and more people. Like in the current cohort I am running, pretty much everybody has had about 20 odd years of experience, institutional leadership experience in some ways or another. So we are gradually enhancing or increasing the barriers of entry, as it were. So this year, what I'm really looking at is a little bit more experience, a little bit more adventurous, a little bit more value enhancing in a sense for people who are actually leading companies, people with about 20, 25 years of experience who want to use the systemic approach and coaching to be able to make meaningful differences in the organization, transforming and so on. So the key word would be culture, change, transformation, and stuff like that amongst the corporate leaders. And one of the things that we are offering is not only just in the classroom, whatever we are doing, this we already started a couple of years ago where the program was built around coaching, leadership, self discovery, and all these three coming together. And this year, as one more element, I'm adding this that I would work with each one of them, whatever be the number of people, maybe between, say, plus minus 15 people, um, in terms of they're actually having an assignment with their companies where they are carrying out a systemic coaching assignment, and I would mentor them, which would be within the cost of the program itself. And whatever time it takes, I'm willing to commit that because I think it's in the larger interest uh, of the world, as if I'm not even talking about just coaching here, that if we could just take pockets of maybe 20 odd people and train them in this way to look at it different. Like Swami Vivekananda so beautifully said, all I need is just a dozen people who are willing to be committed to what I want to do, and I can change this world. And I truly believe it can be done. So I'm not Swami Vivekananda. So maybe with 12 people, I can't do that. But every year, if I do about 20 people for the next few years, and maybe we'll have sufficient number to form a critical mass who could then change the way our corporations think and work and how we can make a difference. So by and large, this is what it is. In very simple terms, it's going to work towards some kind of credentials, be it International Coaching Federation, EMCC, or PCC, whoever. Plus, we are also trying to get accreditation in a few other very, very large reputed organizations. And these people would be corporate leaders. They could be institutional leaders. They could be from NGO sector. They could be from some other sector. But basically, institutional leaders who are used to handling reasonable number of people as teams. And they have the desire to use what they are doing to bring about some change, some kind of a transformation, a cultural, performance oriented, those kind of transformation in their companies, or not just look at OKRs as they are called, KPIs, and so on and so forth. That's what is the end game. It's not. What is the larger cultural shift that I want to have, and how do I grow and sustain in this? And make coaching almost like scenario planning, that I can really keep working towards something which could self-adapt itself like a living organism for the next 20 years without too much of effort. And that's really what the systemic approach at its best can do. And not only the classroom and asynchronous material learning, etc. They will learn to be leaders, they will learn to be coaches, they will learn to self-discover themselves. All this we are already doing and proving that we are doing. Plus, I would work with them in terms of mentoring them in their organization to effect a change and see for themselves how powerfully these principles work. It's not just theory, it's actual practice that happens within that program of, let's say, about 9 months or so.
That's quite a long-term plan that we're looking at. And I imagine it has to be long-term because of the very nature of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, well, it's a long term in terms of effect. I have no clue as to what will happen. But I think, yes, it could potentially develop into something which can have a humongous change. I mean, I would be foolish to compare it with what Otto Scharmer runs as U Labs, which is tremendously even today proving to be that kind of game-changing kind of stuff. But even if it can be a fraction of that kind of a stuff, to be able to make changes in a limited environment and how we can grow, that will be fantastic.
This feels big.
Sure. Yeah.
It feels big. And um, yeah, it feels beautiful. It feels like it's coming from a place of oneness.
True.
Yeah.
It does come from a place of oneness. That's a very, very right word. Yeah. And also, I strongly believe that if you can think about it and if you can create it in your mind, you can create it in reality. That's all it's required. If you strongly believe in it and you can make it happen. And of course, it's not just enough if I do that. So every one of those people who need to do that. And so that's what the effort is. So motivate them enough, make them believe in themselves, make them believe in the process, and make them believe in the people around them. And things start happening. And that is what really a systemic approach is.
That's great. I think that's a beautiful note to end on to wrap up this conversation. Do you have any final words that you would like to say?
No. As long as I have a group of, as I said, around 15 odd people, sure, yeah, and we are ready to start. And look, it's a hero's journey. It's an adventure. Yes, these are the expectations, but I don't know. And each time it goes in its own direction. People who are there, they define that direction. And that direction also doesn't remain the same. It moves into different directions. So each person embarks on a journey of his or her own. So that's the beauty of it. So whoever is coming in for it has to have a spirit of adventure. If they are looking for a structured program, hey, this is what I came for, and this is what I'm going to get, and this is how it is going to be structured, it's not for them. Because that's not the way the world is going to be. That's not the way the world is today. Everything is changes, everything is in flux. So you better get used to the fact that things are constantly evolving, constantly changing. And as that guy with that unpronounceable name put it, the flow, which then happens. Okay. Mikhail, whatever.
Mihai, Chixon,
Whatever. So sorry, I don't even dare to pronounce a word. But yeah, it's a beautiful concept. The flow. It's been always there. The zone, the flow, whatever that we are in, and which we call the mindlessness in Kocharya. So you need to get into that space where you can expand, and the flow expands, and that's really what we are talking about.
Well, if you're ready to go on your adventure and ready to access that flow in your organization, please reach out to us and let us know, and we'll take it from there. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Ram, for your time.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Bye. Take care.
Have a beautiful day.
Yeah. So yeah.